Hello, and welcome to Media MD, your fortnightly Doof Network dose of media that you have somehow missed. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot D. Bold.
And I'm so happy to be back to talk more about Twisted Pair. I almost forgot the name of this movie for a second and just called it Neil Breen. Because that's basically what this episode is going to be, let's be real.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about a specific one of his movies because I don't know what any of them have been about. Just before we jump in, because we're going to start with a plot summary, as is tradition.
Yeah.
And I was very upset to see that in our notes you'd actually written a plot summary.
I had to pre-write it.
So that's the thing. Usually we just wing them, and I was very excited to have dumped this onto you. This impossible task of writing a plot summary for this movie. So at first I was very upset to see that you'd pre-written one. Yeah. But then I read it, and I actually have massive disagreements that this is what the movie was about. So I'm actually very excited for this because I think this is just perfect for this movie because we're going to have a discussion about this plot that you've summarized because I don't think that's the movie I watched.
Okay, so here's the plot of this movie. There's a pair of twins, a twisted pair, shall we say.
Should we?
Yeah, true. We'll get to that in a bit. I see. Okay. I'm off the rails already, but fuck it. I've kind of realized they are a twisted pair. Not twisted that they're really twisted. Although they kind of are. The older one. I don't know why I call him that. The bearded one. He's does some evil stuff. But I think it's twisted in that they're twisted by aliens into other things. They're not twisted like Sick and Twisted. They've been twisted into something other than what they are.
See, okay, so I don't think it was aliens that gave them the magical powers.
No, it definitely was aliens. It's explained. Okay, so before the actual proper movie starts, we get a narration where one of the twins, the non-bearded one, and I can't remember their names. Their names are Kale and Cade, but I don't know which one's which.
Kale is the non-bearded one.
Okay, so Kale's the
I want to say
one.
The good one,
yeah,
but I don't know.
Well, good in a very arbitrary sense. So Kale and Cade, a pair of twins, get abducted by aliens and, DNA magicked into having magical powers, and then they kind of become, intergalactic secret police, and then one of them dies on a mission, and then Kale kind of leaves the alien secret police and comes back to Earth. And this is all in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I want to stop you there because I have two issues with what you said. First of all, I don't think it was aliens. I think it was interdimensional beings, and maybe I'm being semantic.
Yeah, I feel like that's semantics.
But it's not space aliens. I think this is all still mostly happening on Earth, wasn't it?
Well, they definitely the story. Well, okay, so. You may think the story takes place on Earth, but there's one clue that hints that it doesn't, which is that in one of the shots there are two moons, and it's never explained.
Yeah.
So that indicates to me that this actually doesn't take place on Earth, but it kind of looks like Earth. So yeah.
But then there's shots of the moon multiple times later, and there's only one of them, Reuben.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, that's because at that point, one of the moons had set, Elliot, of course. It was just there are two moons, or maybe even more on this planet, but they're not always next to each other the whole time. That would be ridiculous. There's just sometimes two moons in one of these shots, and sometimes one moon.
That actually makes a whole lot of sense, and I have absolutely zero confidence that Neil Breen has thought of that explanation.
No, what actually happened probably was Neil composited two shots, and accidentally he left the moon in both of them one time by mistake. Or alternatively, he wanted there to be two moons, but only remembered to do it for one shot and fucked it up for the others. I don't know. Yeah. They're equally likely.
But anyway, so the other thing I wanted to bring up from your plot summary, even though I assume none of our listeners are following what's happening. This is the first 30
seconds before the movie even starts.
I'm assuming we've already lost everyone, but you mentioned that one of the two brothers died.
Yes.
And I don't think he did. I think he had his powers taken away from him, and his brother says he never saw him again.
That's right. Sorry, you're right. We watched this movie a week ago, and we obviously were drinking at the time and also quite exhausted from the trip we've just been on. So I feel that level of delirium is the right state to watch a Neil Breen movie in, but I think that means that some of these things are going to be slightly wrong, and that's okay.
I think regardless of when we watch some of these things would be slightly
true.
wrong.
It is. A lot of this is just kind of either stolen from someone else's plot summary where they've kind of guessed what happened, or I've just kind of you get like 40% of the picture, and you kind of just have to guess what the rest is based on, what you know of Neil Breen and the kind of thing he would want to do.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's the opening narration. Now, we get into the actual story. So, Kale, the goody one, is back on Earth, or was always on Earth, and he lives there, and he's kind of like a secret agent right now. Like, he seems to go on missions given to him by a kind of M-style figure, from, M. James Bond, Judi Dench style figure, who kind of tells him, hey, you got to go deal with these terrorists, and then he does that. Or, hey, you got to go to this abandoned building where there's these soldiers walking around that are obviously stock footage, and like help them, clear this building. And it's a lot of stock footage and a lot of like GIFs of explosions playing over stock footage. But between that, we can kind of figure out that he's a secret agent, right?
So in fact, I actually thought this lady worked for the group who gave him his magical powers. Maybe, maybe. Do we disagree on that?
I mean, I don't know.
Are we unsure?
Everything in this movie is so arbitrary that it could be either. And look, we've talked about this for enough time that I'm just going to say, like, go watch this movie, because the level of deliriousness that we already have gotten into with this podcast, it's just more entertaining to get into it, to get into that state yourself. It's absolutely a movie where I don't think you go 30 seconds without being confused, which is a weird emotion for a movie that is, meant to be a kind of I kind of get the sense it's meant to be a bit of a like Marvel movie-esque, slightly sci-fi action-y thriller, right?
I think what's interesting here is, and because we touched on this, with these so bad it's good movies, there's, it's hard to not just sort of go super negative, and I don't quite want to do that here because I do genuinely love these Neil Breen films.
Yes,
but
yes.
He has gone for, I think, definitely something that this movie is meant to do is have mind-bending twists. It's meant to be a mindfuck. I just think it's a mindfuck of completely different kind than what Neil was probably going for.
Yeah, interesting. No, that's right, because there are a few twists in this movie. There are a few twists that were genuinely surprising, and both seem to revolve... Well, the two that I can think of off the top of my head revolved around Kale's wife, but we'll get to that in a second. No, yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think that I ironically love these movies. Like, maybe it is irony. I don't know, but it's like, it is such an enjoyable experience, and it's impossible for me to think that Neil Breen doesn't at least have some level of self-awareness about this, because he's not like Tommy Wiseau where he seems delusional. He does interviews, and people say, "Hey, what does this mean?" And he says, "Oh, I'll leave that for you to interpret." He does these things where it's like, I think he sets out to make a good movie, but kind of knows that people don't think that they're good movies. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think like these movies are just so unique. Like, I think that's what separates my enjoyment of them from, say, I think Tommy Wiseau stands as one of the pinnacles of classic so bad it's good cinema, where you're just laughing at how terribly everything is done in the film. Whereas like Neil Breen, there's a lot of stuff that's maybe questionable, but that usually has more to do with budget than anything else. And usually I'm just sitting there like just marveling at the absolute uniqueness of these films and the wavelength that they're operating on. Yeah,
he doesn't set out to make a traditional movie, right? He doesn't set out to make something normal. He definitely he shoots for the moon, and it's you're kind of there with him. Like, I would love to see Neil Breen be a successful filmmaker. It's just he's an incredible auteur. Anyway,
like imagine if somebody gave Neil Breen like a $100 million budget Hollywood film, but complete creative control over what that money was used for.
Yeah,
I would see that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, who knows what it would be? I can't even envisage it. My imagination is failing. Okay, so let's continue through this plot. But
sorry.
Please go watch it if you haven't watched it. So basically, turns out Cade is still alive and on Earth, of course, or Earth ? He's there, and true to Neil Breen form, he is basically exacting his own kind of vigilante justice where he abducts, evil bankers and CEOs and stuff and tortures them, which is a very Neil Breen thing for him to do. It's something that Neil Breen loves to do in all of his movies, is blame all of the world's problems on CEOs and bankers, which he, not unfairly, I think, but very hilariously.
Well, I do think, from the movies I've seen at least, and I'm still unsure how many of the 5 movies I've seen now, it's at least 3 or 4, but this might represent possibly the first grey character in a Neil Breen film that I can remember. It's usually people are either very good or very bad.
Yes, in Neil's eyes, right, his characters will do things like blow up the Senate building, but that's good. That's presented as, he's doing a good thing because these are all bankers that say things like, I'm so happy we've tortured the environment and made a lot of money off of it, which is something that a human being would never say, but this is a Neil Breen staple. Yeah,
exactly. Whereas I think Cade is the first instance I can remember of a character who is presented as an anti-hero, who is sort of on the, doing bad things for the right reasons, I guess. So, and it's interesting how he's treated in the film, given that sort of unique position he has in the films that I've seen.
Yeah, Cale is obviously a lot closer to a traditional Breen protagonist, where it's Neil Breen basically playing a deity-like character that seems to basically be not omniscient, but omnipotent for sure.
A god, some sort of god or something. He's his sort of baseline character.
Yeah, but it is interesting that he's playing another character here who is mortal. Although I think he kind of steps a bit outside of his comfort zone with this character, because the more traditional Neil Breen plot of a godlike character stopping a terrorist plot kind of dominates the second half of this movie, and you kind of lose touch with what actually Cade is up to. He just kind of slips away and you kind of forget about him.
Yep, yeah, that's true. This is an action film, and Cade's got to make way for a part of it for the action sequence.
Yeah. So eventually, Cade and Cale meet up and interact a bit, I guess. And then Cale has to go stop some terrorists, and we kind of focus on that until the movie closes out. And then Cale kind of thinks, and I never did. Now I wonder if I'll ever see Cade again. And it's kind of weird because we don't really resolve the actual twisted pair elements of the movie. It just kind of becomes a different movie.
Well, yeah, and then of course at the end of the movie there's a Cale will return.
Yes, Cale Altair.
Yes, so
it's favourite character.
It's heavily implied that Neil Breen's setting this up to be a series, which I'm very ready for.
Yeah. Not just a series. I kind of get the sense it's a cinematic universe that is being built here. Really, I really do get this strong sense of this is Neil Breen trying to do this is the first, this is the first Avenger star, right? Or maybe cross that with a bit of a Thor, where Cale is Thor, Cade is Loki, kind of a anti-hero in the original movie, but will turn into a villain later, something like that.
I definitely back the idea that this is his interpretation or his version of a Marvel-esque film.
Yes. The thing I'm really excited for is he'll have to introduce more characters, which means in the eventual Avengers-style crossover movie, he's going to be playing 8 characters, which I will be so there for.
Yes, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. That sold me on the premise.
It's all going to be facial hair telling them apart. Yeah.
So let's just quickly, that's essentially wraps up the plot as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
fair.
So I want to talk about a few just sort of little choices. I mean, what are we meant to make of the baddie terrorist that Cale is fighting for the second half of this film, whose name I have forgotten.
I think it's Coos is his name.
Yeah, but it's spelled with 2 Z's and an X.
Yeah. Which is sure. And is this baddie an alien? Here's the question. Is this baddie an alien or some kind of
I'm 90% sure he is, because he speaks with the same effect as a Goa'uld from Stargate. I actually think this might be set in the Stargate universe.
Interesting.
Neil Breen is an ascended ancient. You heard it here first.
Yep, no, I can see that. Or at least he was experimented on by the ancients.
Yeah.
So Kuz speaks with a modulated voice. His voice is modulated to be down by like 2 octaves or so. And he also constantly has a bowl of diamonds that he is forever stroking in every shot that he appears in, that he carries around with him in a kind of like halfway between a bowl and a chalice, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much spot on. I have nothing to add for this because I don't understand it at all.
Yeah. And there's a few bits about this that, well, this is the thing with every Neil Breen movie, I guess. It's just, I guess it's his version of world building where you get these things that aren't fully explained, and in another story or in another movie you'd be like, oh, that's a cool element of the world that we don't need to have fully explained, but it's a thing that exists, and it's maybe something that will get dived into in the wider cinematic universe, right? But in a Breen movie, it's just confusing. He hasn't managed to quite land it, you know?
Yeah, you do. I think I struggle to discern the difference between the things that are just meant to be temporary little bits of extra world building and the world building that actually matters.
Yeah, it's true. There's a few things like that, right? There's
like, let's touch on, like, at one point, this bad guy, Kuz, has like a half-naked fairy girl with him who sparkles as if she's magical.
Yeah,
and she's in sort of 1.5 scenes, and then we never see her again. She's never explained.
She's wearing fairy wings, and I would just kind of assume that it's just a girl wearing fairy wings. Except there's one point where she does seem to. It's open to interpretation because the effects aren't great because it's a low budget, but she does seem to teleport, which indicates that she is some kind of magical servant to him. Even though she's just wearing, like, you know, Halloween store fairy wings.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think, that was just one of those things where she's never really explained, and I guess, you know, it just, she's there, and then there's the teleport thing, you're right, and then she's no longer around, and so it's just like, is she like a fairy in Ocarina of Time, and he sort of used her up?
Yeah, there's also a part where she, like, does a kind of magic spell on what I think is a frame that then kind of turns it into a mirror. I'm not fully remembering this, but I'm pretty sure Kale goes to this terrorist to kind of meet with him about this super weapon that he's developing, and this fairy girl kind of opens this painting or like frame, and it's like where they're storing the super weapon so that Kale can get a look at it. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, I vaguely know what you're talking about, but
yeah, cool. Let's move on. Another one is Kuz seems to have 3 cat statues that are on his table that move by themselves sometimes. Like, and this was my favorite shots in the movie because it is genuinely the only time an effect has really worked for me. It's either a magnet under the table that rotates them or just stop motion of turning them. And they just kind of turn on their own sometimes, and it's not relevant to anything. Doesn't seem to be brought up. No character ever draws attention to it. Just sometimes they turn. And it's very intentional because you get a shot of just the 3 cat statues and then one of them will turn. And it's just there. And it, I don't know what it's about. But again, this is a Neil Breen staple. Things just stop motion animating to turn and never really being addressed.
Yeah, it's... I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, you're right. It's just it's never actually explained. That's probably something for the sequel.
I
do want to talk about one thing.
I just want to say though. Wait. But while we're on the topic of these cat statues, you said that this is something for the sequel, and I like that because these kind of confusing things happen in every Neil Breen movie. But the fact that we know that he's planning to build out a sequel means that we can kind of be a bit more charitable and say, this is a seed that he's laying for later. Not just, this is a random thing that's never going to be explained, which is what it is for all his other movies.
Well, I mean, I'm just so excited to see what a Neil Breen sequel might look like, because we've never seen him do a sequel. Yeah, we've seen him make movies that are very similar to previous movies that he's made.
All his movies are basically sequels to each other anyway.
But we've never seen one that's intended to be a sequel and to carry on a previous story. And Like the flow of the stories in his movies is so unique. I'm so fascinated to see how that uniqueness carries through into his concept of a follow-up story.
Yeah, definitely.
So I briefly want to talk about the acting in this film, because I actually think this is far and away probably some of the best acting in a Neil Breen film. And I mean, it's not, he doesn't have the budget to get, the best actors around or anything, but like Alana, the character who's Kale's wife,
yep,
whose name is only brought up in about the 80th minute of the film for the first time.
Yep.
She was probably the most comfortable looking woman playing one of Neil Breen's characters' significant other that we've seen so far.
Yes, and this is why I quite like the idea of Neil Breen getting more and more success, is because I think it seems like his biggest budget film so far. It's actually shot on locations that aren't just houses, which most of his other films were. And, he seems to have got some higher caliber actors and actresses, which indicates to me, like, and I think this movie is better for it. And I think the experience of watching this movie is better for it, even though it's not as, like, so bad it's good, right? And it makes me excited for Neil Breen to take off more and more, because we will see what it actually looks like. I think the most exciting thing is for him to execute more accurately on his vision, and I can't wait to see more of that.
Yeah, exactly. Because, talking about just sort of low fodder for so bad as good movies, like poor acting is a classic example of that, and it's going to be much more interesting to be able to view Neil Breen's visions when he's surrounded himself with actual actors who are delivering on what he's after. We may actually find out that this is exactly what he's been wanting out of the actors the whole time, and we just weren't getting it.
Yeah. If you're one who does like bad acting, not to fear, because I suspect Neil Breen will continue to put himself as the lead in every film that he does. And I wouldn't want it any other way.
I don't really believe that bit I just said about him getting out of the other actors exactly what he wants, because I don't fully believe that anyone will be able to completely deliver on what Neil Breen is picturing.
Yes, and I think I kind of suspect that as long as he's directing and acting in his films, there's always going to be a gap, just because I think he just can't direct the actors effectively enough while he's acting in the scenes. I think he just doesn't have the kind of experience to know how to do that. And I think that is what kind of makes it so enjoyable as it is.
Yeah, fair.
So there's a lot of weird things in this movie. I mean, there's a lot of the staples of Breen films. There's things like he just doesn't seem to understand technical topics, but he loves to talk about them. Artificial intelligence comes up a fair amount in this, even though there isn't really any artificial intelligence in this movie.
It's implied that Kale and Cade were turned into artificial intelligence.
Yes, although they
by
are
having
seemingly
their DNA altered.
Yeah.
So basically, natural intelligence was taken and augmented through natural means, and it became artificial intelligence.
Yes, and this is kind of implied to us through a series of stock footage / GIFs that is played over the course of this opening narration. Neil also uses the word humanoid a lot to mean something similar to an android, when that isn't what it means. He also talks about programmable virtual reality as a super new innovation that is going to change the world, and is, I think, one of the cruxes of the kind of terrorist plot, which again is kind of hilarious.
I never fully understood exactly what programmable virtual reality is. I mean, obviously, it's kind of a I've forgotten the term for it, but wait, what kind of virtual reality isn't programmable?
Yeah, so Elliot, as someone who, listeners may not know this, but your job is to program virtual reality.
Yes, I am one of the terrorists from this film.
Yeah. Is it? Do you think programmable virtual reality is going to cause the singularity that ends up destroying humanity?
I mean, well, not if we have this humanoid technology that Neil Breen is talking about. No,
that's true. Yeah. I think the one thing that can stand up to virtual reality is humanoids, so thank God for that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a few things in here that are very intentional by Breen that I want to talk about, and there's no better example of this than the first thing that was a genuine twist to me in the movie, which was Kale bumps into a woman in what is meant to be a dingy alleyway with a homeless person and some fake rats on the ground. And they have this thing of she drops a bunch of papers and Kale kind of bends down to help her pick them up and then says things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, please let me make it up to you by taking you to dinner." She's like, "No way, leave me alone, you creep." He tries to get her to meet him back in this alley at 8 p.m, and she very clearly isn't going to do that. And so when she fails to show up later, he stalks her back to her home and breaks in and tries to sexually assault her. But then at some point it becomes obvious that this is just an elaborate fantasy that they are acting out, and this is actually his wife. And it's so uncomfortable and so surprising and so clearly intentional. Like, this is something that obviously Neil Breen wrote to happen, and I don't understand it at all.
It is, I mean, it feels like a twist for a twist's sake is the only explanation I have, because you're right. He sets up the character who we're meant to think is the hero, makes you for a little while think that they're basically going to be a rapist.
Yeah. And
then suddenly pivots back to, oh no, this is all just, elaborate foreplay. And look, I would love to be able to say, this is all sort of defining the greyness that we see in Cade. Kale and Cade, are they that different? They're just a twisted pair.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel like that's being too charitable. It does just kind of feel like this scene exists to send us on an emotional ride, which it definitely achieves.
Yeah, maybe I don't agree with this interpretation, but it could be said that, like, this is Neil Breen doing some kink shaming as like they're actually both twisted, but that doesn't fit with the Neil Breen that I understand, because he seemingly seems to hold quite progressive values. Quite
like
libertarian
all of his
values,
films. All of his films are very pro climate change, very anti capitalist, basically.
Yes. Pro environmentalism, not a pro climate change, I would say.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah. And so I kind of don't like it's. I don't think it is. I think it is just a twist for twist's sake. I think it is us being like the reaction that he wants us to have is, oh, maybe they're both a bit bad. What's going on? But then he's not. I don't know. Yeah. So that's weird. Later on, we find out the wife is actually secretly one of the terrorists and has been kind of with him for this whole time as a kind of sleeper agent deal. Which, again, a twist that I didn't expect. Nothing really happens.
It actually made me... I after this happened, I did sit there for a while and think, were we meant to think that maybe he got whammied somehow, or she got whammied somehow? Because the whole way it turns around when she is suddenly like, oh, we're husband and wife or whatever, I was like, has he whammied her? But then he's the one who gets betrayed, so that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I tried to connect those two dots in my head, but I don't think that goes anywhere.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. She kind of, he finds out that she's a villain, and she pulls a gun on him and shoots him, and he shoots her back. But of course, he is a god, so the bullet that she shoots him with seems to have no effect. We don't find out what has happened to it. It just kind of... It's as though he was never shot, but she was still shot and dies. It's very confusing.
Yep.
Very confusing. Yeah. So there's a few twists in this one, and it makes me think this is his... I don't know. It's hard to think what he's going for. I think it is a kind of cross between Thor and maybe a Winter Soldier movie. I don't know. Look, I just don't know, Elliot. It's just it's a good time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else I might have to add. We could talk about, some of those things, like there's a fake mustache that gets passed around some of the actors at various points.
It's so bad. There's actually some decent looking fake hair in. I mean, not great, but it's fine. But then there's this one moustache that is actually just like a few hairs sprinkled on a piece of tape. And it's so weird. I don't understand it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it had to be some sort of last minute addition because it's so far below the rest of the props.
Yeah.
because the tape is very reflective and is usually more visible than the hairs.
Yeah.
So it just kind of stands out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
but like,
moustache.
I don't know. I think we've sort of talked about everything we can. I mean, you know, if you still somehow have gotten this far through, what I assume is just a bit of a clusterfuck of an episode,
Yeah.
and you haven't watched the movie, like, go do it, because I guarantee you that as incoherent as this episode has been, it's nothing compared to the experience that you're in for with a Breen film.
Yes, if you've never seen a Neil Breen movie before, I think this is his most approachable one.
Yeah.
Because it does, at least for the first half, kind of have a plot. Like, it kind of follows a 3-act structure where you kind of think, okay, well, some stuff's going to happen. Maybe they'll have to solve a crime together or something. Obviously, the third act gets lost on the way, but, you know, it eases you in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least it kind of feels like two disjointed plots. I would argue a lot of his other films have not even sort of felt like they felt like 20 multiple disjointed plots.
True. He's nailing the concept of the A-B structure.
Yeah, so I think this is far and away his most coherent film. Not to say that it is a coherent film. But yeah, I think this is a great place to start.
Yeah. So, of course, as format demands, I must give this a number out of 10. And it's a weird one, but I think it gets a 9. Like, honestly, it was just such a fun experience to watch. I can't not give it a really high number because I really enjoyed it.
I guess we should say, we had a group, like, it wasn't just me and Reuben watching this. There were 3 other people in the room, and I think, and we had a bit of alcohol. And I think that's probably the ideal way to go about watching this. Probably the group more than the alcohol. I think this is just something that you need to experience with other people.
Yes, watch it at night. Get a few friends together. Let yourself enjoy the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's Twisted Pair. I'm excited for Twisted Pair 2, which will presumably be about a twisted set of triplets. And there'll be a secret third brother that they didn't know, and he'll always wear a cowboy hat, so you can tell them apart. Get in touch, Neil Breen. I would love to write for your movies.
I'd give it even odds that that's correct.
Yeah. I don't know if we touched on this, but both characters are Neil Breen, one with a beard, one without. It's hilarious, and he does a lot of like standard composition shots where the characters can't actually interact, but they're on different halves of the frame.
Yeah.
We didn't even touch on him like jumping around the factory that explodes at the end, which is one of the best.
Yeah. There's some cool like Spider-Man-esque shots that just unfortunately Neil doesn't quite have the budget yet to realize as much as he'd like.
I think he does all the effects himself, and that means that they just aren't there. But that's fine. It's great. It's still hilarious. So that's that. I'm going to forget about this movie now. Let's talk about what we're doing next fortnight. Because next fortnight, Elliot, the episode is coming out on Halloween. Ooh, spooky.
I'm already spooked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've touched on this in, I think it was the movie where we did it, the episode where we did It Follows.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not usually a huge horror person. I think I talked about the loop I go through where I won't watch a horror film for like 6 to 12 months, and then I think, I want to watch a horror film, and I watch it, and it absolutely scares the shit out of me, and I remember why I don't watch horror films. It's been about 6 months since we did It Follows, so I'm in the next stage of that loop, and I'm ready to be hit with a horror film for Halloween, and to remind me why I don't watch horror films.
Yeah, so since you don't watch horror films for 6 months, but we usually do Halloween episodes, I kind of wanted to fix up the scheduling a bit. So I'll give you 2 horror films for Halloween each year, and then by next Halloween you'll be precisely ready to watch another 2. So that's the thought. Yeah. So the 2, I wanted to talk about Jordan Peele and his films, and I couldn't pick between them, so I'm bringing you both of his recent films. They're called Get Out, which won Best Original Screenplay in 2017, and also Us, which is also a good movie, but didn't win any Oscars, I don't think.
Yeah, but I'm excited for this. These are both movies that I sort of have meant to see, but as I said, I don't get around to watching horror films, so I'm excited because I do really want to see both of these.
Yes. I think it's worth pointing out these movies are very, very good, but they are also horror movies. And being very good horror movies, it means that they are scary. I would say Us is scarier than Get Out, but both of them are scary movies. So if you're not into scary movies, give these ones a miss. That's totally fine. I'm talking to the audience, not you, Elliot. You have to watch them. You have no
That'd
escape.
make a very interesting episode next week.
Yeah, I ended up just not watching them. So no, yeah. So I think the reason, like these kind of the kind of narrative around them was when they came out was, hey, these movies are revitalizing the horror genre, which I think is a bit of a shitty narrative, but they are two very, very good movies that reached kind of mass kind of user and critical appeal, because they are very, very well made movies, and they also are both very much saying something. I think almost certainly some of their messages went over my head as a white Australian, where these movies are kind of made by and say things about the Black African American experience. But even with that, these movies really sat with me for a week or two. Not just because they were scary and I was spooked, but because there were things in them that I just wanted to explore in my head. You know, there are themes in these movies that you just want to think about, that you just want to kind of puzzle your way through and think, now what is he saying with this? Oh, and it ties back into this thing from earlier on in the movie. All kinds of things like that, where these are movies that are so enjoyable to discuss after you've watched them.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's good, because I've definitely... Yeah, I mean, obviously you have horror movies that are basically just horror movies, and it sounds like that's not what this is. These are films that are using horror to make a point, basically.
Yeah, I'll kind of contrast it to a movie from, I think, 2018, maybe, called Hereditary, which starred Toni Collette. Was a horror movie about Toni Collette and her children. Did you watch this movie in the end, Elliot?
We saw it together, actually. That was when you were up in Armidale.
Oh, cool.
For Heather's, I think. So that must have been a year and a half ago now.
Yeah, and that was a movie that I really enjoyed, but it was a horror movie trying to scare you. And there were some things in it that were, like, it was really well made and everything, but it didn't feel like it had a deeper message. It had some things to think about and reflect on and think, oh, here's a cool connection from earlier in the movie that ties back to what happens later. But that wasn't in service of a message. It was in service of a well-crafted film, which is fine. But I think that's different to Get Out and Us in that there are things that you are being asked to think about. Things like class struggles and the African-American experience and post-race racism and what that looks like. And I think it's great. Basically, it's great. And so I'm excited to talk more about it once you've actually seen the movies.
Me too. I'm excited for these. I think, they're horror films, so they're going to spook me, but I'm excited that there's going to be, other things to talk about as well.
Yeah. I even would say, to those of us, not you, Elliot, this doesn't apply to you, but to the audience, if you're kind of on the fence about these, totally just watch them during the daytime. You will still get a lot out of these movies, even if they aren't scary to you because you're chilling, on the patio with a nice Aperol spritz or whatever, watching a horror movie. There will still be interesting questions raised too, and I think that's a great endorsement for these films.
Yeah. Okay. I'm keen.
But not you. You have to watch them at spooky times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I guess we'll be back for Halloween to talk about it.
Yeah, but I guess that's the end of our episode. I don't think either of us has said the word Breenius yet, so I'm doing it here.
Okay, thanks. So if you enjoyed the show and you want to engage with us a bit more, the best place to do that is on our Twitter, which is at mediamdpodcast. Sometimes we'll tweet out stuff as we're checking it out, or people tweet us thoughts and we have conversations. Check us out.
Yes, and an even better place to reach us is the Doof Discord, which is available to all patrons of Doof, regardless of how much you give us, even if it's just $1. And it's such a great community. I think we've mentioned this before, but it's probably where I spend the most time online. Yeah. Now, I should probably cut back, to be honest.
There's so many channels to read, though.
I know. But if you head to patreon.com/doofmedia, you can see all the other great perks you get. And, one of those is, as I said, is the Discord, and it's a great place to hang out. So come join us.
Yeah. Yes, please do. If you want to leave us your comments on us or on Twisted Pair, or on any Breen or any Breen films, I suppose, or Jordan Peele films, I guess, for that matter, you can do that through our website as well, or by emailing us. You can email mediamdpodcast@gmail.com, or on our website, mediamdpodcast.com. There is a place to leave us audio messages, and if you do that, we might feature some of them in the show and kind of talk about them. I think
Yes.
us and Get Out are two great films for this to apply to, because there's a lot to be talked about. So if you have some thoughts, please do leave us an audio message. It would be really appreciated.
Yeah, we don't plug that new feature enough. So yeah, and you know, I guess the other option, if you want to submit ideas for things for us to cover, you could also leave a message about that. But yeah, so either or, you know, send us something about the upcoming episode, or send us ideas for episodes. You know, we'd just be happy to hear from you.
Yep. If you want to find out more about the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com. Which is the home of all the Duff shows, including all the great ones like Vow to View, which has just come out with a new episode. Vow to View. What You Say, which has just come out with a new episode about episode 9 of the OC, so check that out. On duffmedia.com, you can also find links to all the things we just mentioned. Follow us, you know, contact us, etc. Oh, and you can also find all of the previous clues for the Media MD ARG. You can help us figure out just who is Dr. MD, and why. Just why? Elliot, why don't you tell the listeners this fortnight's clue?
Tape.
And we'll see you next fortnight.